Imagine you are a high-level education official in Japan, right?
Yeah.
You are tasked with analyzing the entire global landscape of school operations.
A pretty massive job.
Completely massive. And your goal is to find ways to improve your own nation's educational infrastructure.
Mm.
So who do you call?
Well, you'd think they would reach out to, like, massive international think tanks, or maybe Ivy League policy centers.
Exactly, or some billionaire-funded tech initiative. But instead, you pick up the phone and contact an organization in the United States to ask a series of highly specific questions about, and this is wild, a role most people completely take for granted.
The American school secretary.
Yes, the school secretary.
Which is, I mean, that decision alone signals a massive shift in how we understand institutional bottlenecks.
Oh, absolutely.
An international education professional looking at the sprawling complexity of American schools and concluding that the secret to operational success hides at the front desk.
Which perfectly sets the stage for our deep dive today. So welcome to everyone listening. I'm your host, and whether you are a school leader, someone who is knee-deep in organizational operations, or just a learner fascinated by how complex systems actually manage to improve themselves, this breakdown is designed for you.
And I'm thrilled to be here to help unpack this. I'm your resident expert for today's discussion.
Today, we are exploring a paradigm shift in problem-solving and organizational growth. We are moving away from those, temporary band-aids that organizations love to buy, and we're looking at the architecture of lasting systemic health.
To guide this exploration, we are dissecting a pretty dense but incredibly insightful excerpt from a briefing called Today's Education Innovation Spotlight.
A great source.
Yeah, and the focus of this spotlight is an organization called the Lofton Group, spearheaded by Lachelle Lofton, which is catching both national and clearly, based on your intro international attention, for a really unique, multi-angled approach to school support.
Reading through this briefing, it fundamentally challenges the traditional consulting model. Because the standard approach to consulting across almost any industry is notoriously detached.
It's entirely detached.
A team of outside experts parachutes into a struggling building. They observe the chaos for a few weeks, write up this massive, heavy binder full of theoretical recommendations, drop it on the principal's desk, send a massive invoice, and simply vanish.
Right, leaving the actual institution to figure out the nuts and bolts of implementation.
Good luck. Really?
Exactly. A school administrator is handed a 100-page strategic plan while simultaneously dealing with a flooded cafeteria, 3 absent teachers, and a parent dispute in the lobby.
So the binder just ends up on a shelf gathering dust.
Because the daily operational fires leave no oxygen for high-level strategic implementation.
Which brings us to the core differentiator of the Lofton Group that's outlined in our source material. The briefing features this back-and-forth dialogue between 2 analysts, David and Samuel. And Samuel makes a critical distinction early on. He states that the Lofton Group is not just another consulting company. The phrasing he uses to describe their structure is an ecosystem of services.
And that term ecosystem is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that dialogue. It implies interdependence.
How so?
Well, in biological terms, if you introduce a new species into a lake to manage the algae, but you don't account for how that species interacts with the native fish or, the oxygen levels in the water, the entire lake dies.
Wow, yeah.
The analysts are suggesting that educational consulting usually fails because it treats symptoms in isolation.
Okay, let's unpack this because I want to push back on the terminology for a second.
Sure.
The business world is completely saturated with jargon. Startups and legacy corporations alike love to claim they have an ecosystem when, in reality, all they really have is a bundle of loosely related products. It's like a mechanic just handing you a diagnostic report instead of fixing the engine and teaching you how to maintain it.
Yeah, that happens a lot.
So, does the source material actually provide evidence of real integrated support here? We need to know if this is a structural reality or just a fancy corporate buzzword.
What's fascinating here is the specific breakdown of the domains this consulting division tackles simultaneously. The source explicitly lists operations, compliance, enrollment, and strategic planning.
All 4 at once.
All 4. And by looking at the causal relationships between those 4 pillars, we can see that ecosystem isn't just a marketing term, it's a structural necessity. None of those areas can function independently without collapsing the others.
Let's trace that causality for the listener. How does a failure in one of those pillars trigger a collapse in the rest of the ecosystem?
Let's consider enrollment. On the surface, enrollment looks like a marketing or community outreach challenge, right?
Just needing a certain number of students to fill seats?
Exactly. But enrollment numbers dictate state and federal funding. If enrollment drops unexpectedly, the school's revenue shrinks. That instantly becomes an operations crisis.
Right, because now operations has to slash the budget.
Yes, they might have to cut a specialized reading program or reduce transportation services.
And when you start cutting programs, you run directly into the third pillar, compliance.
Precisely the friction point. State regulations and federal guidelines mandate certain levels of service for special education, safety standards, teacher-to-student ratios.
So a desperate operations team making blind budget cuts to compensate for low enrollment might inadvertently violate a federal compliance mandate.
And a compliance violation can trigger massive financial penalties or even threaten the school's charter entirely.
Oh, wow.
So suddenly, the long-term strategic plan, which is the fourth pillar, is completely derailed because the leadership team is spending all their time fighting a legal and financial fire.
So if a traditional consultant drops off a binder that just says, here is a new marketing strategy to boost enrollment, they are ignoring the fact that the school's operational infrastructure might not be able to process an influx of 50 new students without violating compliance codes.
Exactly. They miss the big picture.
But the Lofton Group's ecosystem model treats the entire organism. They are managing the water pH, the oxygen levels, and the wildlife simultaneously.
They recognize that you cannot isolate strategic planning from the harsh reality of daily compliance and operations. You have to build architecture that supports all of them at once.
That structural alignment is incredibly logical. But, and this is a big say, but it exposes a massive gap in execution.
How do you mean?
Well, if the consulting wing of the Lofton Group is in the boardroom handling this high-level, multifaceted architecture, navigating compliance audits, and shaping 5-year enrollment targets, who is actually inputting the data?
Right.
Because the most brilliant strategic plan relies entirely on the accuracy of the data being typed into a computer at the front desk.
And that space, the space between boardroom theory and ground-level execution, is where most organizations bleed resources. Leaders assume that just because a policy was written, it will be seamlessly enacted by the staff.
Here's where it gets really interesting in the source material and where that Japanese education professional's inquiry comes into sharp focus.
Yes, the front desk.
To bridge that exact implementation gap, the Lofton Group built a completely separate yet integrated division called Office Manager University.
Such a unique concept.
The text states its mission is developing exceptional front office professionals through specialized online training and professional development.
Focusing professional development dollars on the front office is a radical departure from industry norms. Think about it. Most educational funding for training flows directly to teachers or high-level administrators.
Almost exclusively.
Right. The front office staff, the office managers, secretaries, and receptionists, they're usually treated as purely clerical workers.
They are handed a phone, a stack of visitor badges, and a login to a database they've never seen before.
And they are expected to simply absorb the complexity of the school's operations through osmosis.
Which is exactly why the Japanese education professional reached out to Lachelle Lofton. The source notes they asked very specific questions about the American school secretary role.
They weren't asking basic questions.
No, they didn't ask about answering phones. They asked about the required qualifications, they asked about ongoing training methodologies, and they specifically inquired about how these front office roles are integrating artificial intelligence and how these individuals collaborate with business administrators.
Those questions reveal a deep, deep understanding of modern institutional mechanics.
They really do.
The international community is recognizing that the school secretary is no longer just a typist. They are a data manager, a compliance officer, and a public relations representative wrapped into one.
All at the same time.
Yeah. And by asking about AI integration and collaboration with business administrators, they are acknowledging the role's evolution into a highly technical, strategic position.
Let's explore that evolution, because when you mention AI integration at a school's front desk, some listeners might picture like a robot answering the door.
Right, some sci-fi scenario.
What does it actually look like to train an office manager in these advanced skills?
Well, think about the daily workflow. A modern school front office receives hundreds of communications a day. Emails from concerned parents, absence notifications, medical updates, vendor invoices.
It's a fire hose of information.
Exactly. So Office Manager University, training these professionals to use AI, involves teaching them how to automate the triage of this data.
Oh, that makes sense.
An office manager can use AI tools to instantly draft routine, policy-compliant responses to common parent inquiries, or, and this is huge, to translate a complex attendance policy into multiple languages for non-English speaking families within seconds.
That alone buys back hours of time. Time that can be spent on the other area Japan asked about collaborating with business administrators.
And the collaboration piece is really the linchpin of the whole ecosystem.
Because the business admin is removed from the daily chaos.
Exactly. A business administrator sits in a central office trying to balance a multi-million-dollar budget. They rely entirely on the daily attendance data, the free and reduced lunch applications, and the staff substitute logs to make financial projections.
So if the data's wrong, the budget is wrong.
Right. If the person at the front desk doesn't understand why that data needs to be coded in a highly specific way for compliance reasons, the business administrator is flying blind.
It's the equivalent of a hospital administrator trying to order medical supplies when the triage nurse isn't accurately logging patient intake.
The entire supply chain breaks down.
Office Manager University is essentially professionalizing the gatekeepers. They are taking the unsung heroes of the building and giving them the technical vocabulary and systems training to understand how their keystrokes impact the federal funding of the entire institution.
By elevating the front desk from a clerical role to a strategic partnership, the Lofton Group closes the implementation gap.
Because the strategy and the execution are finally connected.
Yes, the boardroom strategy created by their consulting arm is directly supported because they are simultaneously training the very people tasked with executing the daily logistics of that strategy.
So we have the two pillars firmly established. We have the strategic consulting wing, acting as the architects of the ecosystem, managing the complex interplay of operations, compliance, and enrollment. And we have Office Manager University acting as the engineers on the ground, training the front office professionals to actually run the machinery using advanced tools like AI and data collaboration.
Which seamlessly transitions our focus to the ultimate outcome.
When you successfully merge high-level structural architecture with targeted ground-level workforce development, what is the net result for the school?
The source material provides a very clear metric for this outcome. The analyst, Samuel, summarizes the impact by stating, schools aren't just receiving advice, they're building the internal capacity to sustain improvements.
That phrase is key.
Yeah, and David then expands on this, detailing that they provide implementation support, administrative systems, and operational guidance to strengthen day-to-day processes.
So what does this all mean? Let's look at that phrase, building internal capacity, because I really want to analyze the long-term business logic here.
Okay.
If the Lofton Group's ultimate goal is to build an institution's internal capacity to sustain its own improvements, don't they eventually work themselves out of a job?
That's the million-dollar question.
A traditional consultant builds a model of dependence. A school falls out of compliance, they hire the consultant patches the hole, leaves, and the school's untrained staff inevitably lets the system decay again.
And 2 years later, they have to pay the consultant for another contract.
Exactly. But by actively teaching a school how to maintain its own ecosystem, Lofton is manufacturing independence.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, manufacturing independence is the only sustainable way to scale organizational health.
Yeah, it really is.
The traditional model of perpetual dependence is exactly why educational consulting has a tarnished reputation in many districts. It drains public resources without altering the foundational habits of the institution.
It's treating the symptom indefinitely instead of curing the disease.
Right. Creating a cure requires a transfer of knowledge, which David refers to as implementation support and operational guidance.
So they aren't just handing over a report.
Not at all. When Lofton's consultants work with a school, they aren't just generating a compliance report behind closed doors and handing it to the principal. They were sitting with the staff, auditing the administrative systems together. They were rewiring the muscle memory of the organization.
Rewiring the muscle memory. That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. It's the difference between hiring a chef to cook you a single meal versus hiring a chef to redesign your kitchen, organize your pantry, and teach you the techniques to cook for yourself.
That's a great analogy.
Yes, the chef eventually leaves your house, but your capacity to feed yourself has been permanently altered.
And in the context of a complex organization, that independence completely changes how leadership operates.
Let's go back to that enrollment example.
Okay, let's return to the scenario of dropping enrollment. In a dependent school, a drop in enrollment causes a panic, the budget breaks, and they have to call outside help to figure out where the leak is.
But in a school that has built internal capacity through this ecosystem model,
The reality looks entirely different.
walk us through that independent reality. What does it look like on a random Tuesday?
On a random Tuesday, the front office professional, trained through Office Manager University, notices a statistical anomaly in the transfer request data using their new tracking software.
Because they actually know what they're looking at.
Exactly. Because they understand the strategic implications, they don't just file the paperwork. They flag the trend and bring it directly to the business administrator.
Proactive instead of reactive.
Yes. The leadership team then uses the integrated operational systems provided by the consulting wing to pivot their enrollment strategy proactively before the budget is ever threatened. The crisis is averted internally.
The left hand doesn't just know what the right hand is doing, they are reading from the exact same sheet of music.
Beautifully put.
The consultant doesn't need to be in the building because the systems and the training remain active long after the initial intervention. The reputation built by actually solving problems permanently rather than just renting out solutions is likely what drives their national and international attention.
Without a doubt. An organization like the Japanese Education Ministry isn't looking for a quick fix for a single school.
No, they're looking at the whole country.
They were looking for a scalable methodology to fortify thousands of schools. When they see a model that successfully professionalizes the operational ground floor while simultaneously rebuilding the strategic roof, they recognize a blueprint for national resilience.
This entirely reframes how we should evaluate the organizations we rely on. We've traced the journey from the boardroom's theoretical strategies all the way down to the keystrokes at the front desk and proved that you simply cannot separate the two.
You really can't.
To summarize the core takeaway from our source material, for you, the listener, the Lofton Group has exposed the fatal flaw in fragmented problem solving. If a complex system, whether it's a school, a hospital, or a corporate enterprise, wants to achieve lasting health, it must abandon the practice of buying isolated advice.
The era of the drop-off consulting binder is obsolete. You cannot fix compliance without fixing operations, and you cannot fix operations without fiercely investing in the professional development of the people managing the daily data.
Which means treating the front office not as a waiting room, but as the operational nerve center of the entire enterprise.
Precisely.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a lingering thought to explore on your own. Consider the environments you navigate every single day, your office, the clinic you visit, the schools in your community.
Really look at how they operate.
Observe how they function under stress. Are their leaders simply collecting expensive external advice that sits in a drawer? Or are they actively dedicating resources to build the internal capacity of their frontline professionals?
It demands a shift in where we look for organizational potential.
Look at the desk by the front door. How much untapped power to enact real systemic change is sitting right there, waiting for the training and the tools to lead?
A vital question for any leader to answer.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the systems around you.